There's a power game happening right under your nose, and you're losing it every single day. Every time you apologize without thinking, you're handing over your credibility like it's nothing. But here's what nobody tells you. The most successful people in history barely apologized at all. They had a different playbook. And once you understand this playbook, you'll never look at apologies the same way again. This might make you uncomfortable. Good. That means you're paying attention. What if ancient warriors knew something about power that you don't? Let me take you back to feudal Japan. The samurai operated under a code called Bushido, and buried in that code was a rule that most people completely miss. They believed that explanation was weakness. That justification was surrender. When a samurai made a decision, even a wrong one, he stood by it silently and corrected course through action, not words. Why does this matter to you right now, in the modern world? Because the psychology hasn't changed. Human hierarchies still operate on the same primal software. When you over-apologize, you're activating ancient social triggers that mark you as subordinate. Your brain knows it, their brain knows it, and once that pattern is set, it's incredibly hard to break. Think about the last time you watched a presidential debate. Notice how candidates almost never say, "I'm sorry." They pivot, they reframe, they acknowledge and move forward. That's not accident. That's media training, based on decades of research showing that apologies cost votes. Because voters, like all humans, unconsciously associate apologies with weakness, even when they consciously claim to value humility. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called status calibration. Every interaction you have is subconsciously calculating where you stand in the social hierarchy. And apologies, especially unnecessary ones, are status signals. They tell everyone around you, "I'm lower on the ladder." Once you send that signal repeatedly, it becomes your brand. People start treating you accordingly. Now, I'm not talking about sociopathic behavior here. I'm talking about strategic communication. The Roman generals understood this perfectly. When they made tactical errors, they didn't gather the legions for a public apology tour. They adjusted their strategy, led from the front, and let their next victory speak for them. Results erased mistakes. Words just highlighted them. Here's where it gets really interesting. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that people who apologize frequently experience higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. Their body is literally responding to apologies as threats to their social standing. You're biologically wired to feel the cost of every unnecessary apology, even if you don't consciously realize it. The discipline required for high performance demands that you become ruthlessly selective about when you show vulnerability. Not because vulnerability is bad, but because it's powerful. And powerful tools need to be used strategically, not scattered everywhere like confetti. So here's the real question. Are you apologizing out of genuine remorse and responsibility, or out of conditioned fear of disapproval? How elite negotiators use silence where you use sorry. Let's talk about something that's going to change how you see power dynamics forever. There's a legendary story about a negotiation between two tech giants in Silicon Valley. One CEO made a critical error in the deal structure that could have cost his company millions. The other CEO pointed it out, expecting an apology, maybe even some concessions. You know what happened? Nothing. The first CEO sat in complete silence for what felt like an eternity, then simply said, "Let's adjust the terms to reflect current market conditions." No apology, no admission, just a redirect. And he walked away with a better deal than he had before. The mistake. That's what I call cold power. It's the ability to maintain frame even when you're wrong. And before you think that sounds manipulative, understand this. In competitive environments, apologies are interpreted as permission to exploit. It's not personal. It's just how the game works at high levels. The Stoic philosophers, especially Seneca, wrote extensively about this. He said that dwelling on past errors was voluntary misery, that every moment spent explaining yourself was a moment stolen from building solutions. The Stoics weren't cold-hearted. They were efficiency-obsessed. They understood that emotional energy was finite and should be invested in action and performance. Now apply this to your career. How many times have you apologized in a meeting for something that didn't even require an apology? "Sorry, can I just add something?" "Sorry, I might be wrong, but these micro-apologies are corroding your authority one interaction at a time. People don't even register them consciously, but subconsciously, they're categorizing you as someone who needs permission to exist in the room. Chess grandmasters have a saying, "The threat is stronger than the execution." Applied here, it means that the possibility that you might be unapologetically confident is more powerful than actually proving you're right. Uncertainty works in your favor when you don't fill it with apologies. Here's what the intelligence community knows that you don't. CIA operatives are trained in something called emotional compartmentalization. When they make mistakes in the field, they don't process them emotionally in real time. They log it, learn from it, and move on. Emotions come later in controlled environments. Because in high-stakes situations, apologetic behavior can literally get you killed. You're not in life or death scenarios daily, but the principle applies. In negotiations, in leadership, in building your personal brand, apologetic energy broadcasts that you're not sure of your own value. And if you're not sure, why should anyone else be? Why the world's most powerful people apologize differently than you do. Here's something that's going to mess with your worldview. I spent months studying apologies from Fortune 500 CEOs, world leaders, and military commanders, and I found a pattern that nobody talks about. When they apologize, it's never just an apology. It's a strategic communication move wrapped in 3 layers: acknowledgement without submission, redirection to solution, and reassertion of authority. Let me break that down. Take any major corporate scandal. The CEO comes out and says something like, "We recognize the concerns. We've implemented new protocols, and we're committed to leading the industry forward." Notice what's missing. The word "sorry" usually doesn't even appear, and when it does, it's buried under so much forward-looking language that it barely registers. That's not PR spin. That's understanding of high-performance communication. Because they know that the moment you center an apology, you center the problem. You make the mistake, the story. But when you center the solution, you control the narrative. You transform from defendant to leader in one sentence. The ancient alchemists had a concept called transmutation, turning lead into gold. In modern communication, this means turning errors into evolution. The mistake isn't denied, but it's also not given power. It becomes fuel for the next move, not an anchor dragging you down. Now, let's look at warfare strategy. In military academies around the world, they teach something called after-action review. It's brutal honesty about what went wrong, but it's done in a specific context: learning and adaptation. It's never about blame. It's never about making someone feel bad for their errors. It's pure analysis. Emotion doesn't enter the room. Imagine if you applied that to your life. What if, instead of apologizing and feeling guilty, you simply said, "That didn't work. Here's what I'm doing differently." That's accountability without subordination. That's taking responsibility without giving away power. Here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Society teaches you to apologize constantly because it keeps you manageable. Apologetic people are easier to control. They second-guess themselves. They seek approval. They don't rock boats. But high performers, they rock boats on purpose. They make waves. And they don't apologize for the splash. The monk tradition has something relevant here too. Buddhist monks practice radical acceptance, acknowledging reality without judgment. When they make mistakes, they don't flagellate themselves. They observe, adjust, and continue their practice. There's no guilt performance. There's only awareness and adaptation. That's the level you need to operate at if you want to play in arenas that matter. Drop power in the comments if this is rewiring how you think about control. And hit that like button, because what's coming next is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about strength. Subscribe if you're done playing small. How to know when apologizing is strength versus when it's self-sabotage. Alright, let's get real. I'm not saying you should become a ruthless machine without empathy. That's not high performance. That's just being an asshole. There's a massive difference, and understanding that difference is what separates true leaders from pretenders. Here's the framework. Apologize when it builds bridges with people who are in your inner circle, who you're invested in long term, who matter to your mission. Don't apologize when you're in competitive arenas where others are looking for openings to exploit. It's that simple and that complex. Navy SEAL teams do something fascinating. When they debrief missions, everyone admits mistakes openly. But it's not apologetic. It's tactical. "I was 2 seconds late on the entry" isn't followed by "I'm sorry." It's followed by "here's how I'm fixing my timing for next op." That's the difference. Accountability with forward momentum versus apology with stagnation. The greatest trial lawyers in history understood this instinctively. When they made errors in court, they never showed weakness to the opposing counsel. They pivoted, reframed, and moved on. But to their teams, in private, they'd acknowledge what went wrong and adjust. They had situational awareness about when vulnerability was an asset and when it was ammunition for the enemy. Think about the technology leaders who shaped our world. Steve Jobs was notorious for rarely apologizing, even when he was objectively wrong. Elon Musk operates the same way. These aren't role models for empathy, but they are case studies in maintaining authority. They understood that in their specific arenas, apologies would be interpreted as uncertainty, and uncertainty kills innovation. Now, here's where most people get it twisted. They think this means you should be cold in all situations. Wrong. With your family, your close friends, your genuine relationships, apologize authentically and often when you mess up. That's where connection lives. That's where trust is built. But in professional battles, in negotiations, in competitive environments, different playbook entirely. The ultimate high-performance move is knowing which game you're playing at any given moment, and having the discipline to switch modes appropriately. That's not being fake. That's being effective. So final challenge. This week, catch yourself before every apology. Ask, is this strengthening my position or weakening it? Just that awareness will change everything. Drop archaeologist in the comments if you want me to dig up more secrets about power dynamics that school never taught you. Smash that subscribe button because clearly you're not interested in average anymore. And share this with someone who needs to stop bleeding authority through unnecessary apologies. Disclaimer: this content is for educational purposes and encourages critical thinking about communication strategies and social dynamics. It is not intended to promote lack of empathy or disrespect toward others. Context and human decency should always guide your decisions.